The president wanted a blank check 6 months ago, and he wants a blank check today. This is just not going to happen.
For the first time in history, our country's AAA credit rating would be downgraded, leaving investors around the world to wonder whether the United States is still a good bet.
So you just heard first John Boehner for the Republicans, and then, of course, President Obama talking about this debt crisis, U.S. debt ceiling decision. Will it affect Canada's economy and our investments? Rubina Ahmed-Haq, freelance business correspondent. She's with alwayssavemoney.ca. Joins me now. Rubina, welcome.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good to talk to you again.
Yes, always nice to speak to you.
There are intransigeable positions, apparently. It seems like Obama will not give in, and neither will the Republicans.
Well, it's really because they have two different opinions on how they want to deal with their problems going forward. You got the Republicans who say you've got to just cut back on spending. That's the only way we're going to get our fiscal house in order. And then Obama saying that we need to have a mix. We need to raise taxes, especially for those very, very rich Americans that have been enjoying a lower tax rate. And we need to also cut back on spending as well. So it really is coming down, this deadline of August 2nd, of how much they're going to raise the debt ceiling and if they're going to do it at all. It's really coming down to how they're actually going to convince the government that it needs to be done.
Sounds like the battle in Toronto.
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, money is an issue for everyone, Jerry. I mean, everyone is struggling with higher prices and everyone is struggling with paying their bills. The United States, the reason this really concerns me is that it's the world's biggest economy. I mean, put it in perspective. If the world's biggest economy is having problems with paying their bills, the effects around the world would just be horrendous. We'd be looking at something like a double-dip recession. Obama said it himself. They're a AAA rated country. Right now, if you buy a U.S. bond, you're getting AAA guarantee that money will be worth something. If they're downgraded, what happens to countries like France, the UK, are also triple rated? Do they stand taller than the U.S.? I don't think so.
What's our rating?
Our rating is AAA. Our
Okay.
rating is AAA. But at the same time, I mean, Canada doesn't have the same debt problems that the United States does. But if the U.S. is downgraded and they continue to have money problems and we continue to have problems trading with them, we could have our own debt problems down the road.
Well, our dollar gets stronger and stronger because of this, and that's always a good news, bad news situation.
Well, I think it's bad news 90% and good news 10%. And I think a lot of people, I've been talking to a lot of friends saying we're going to, down to Buffalo on the long weekend to do some shopping. And that is a very short-term gratification. You get 10% more for your money when you go down there. Today the dollar again is up more than $1.06 right now. If you put $1 Canadian down, you'll get $1.06 American. That is good news just for people who want to shop at J. Crew across the border. Realistically, though, our businesses suffer because it becomes more expensive for them to do trade across our border. Our economy suffers because we can't sell our goods and services at the same rate that we were selling it. And then the United States, being that big giant that we live next to, if that economy continues to falter, we do 75% of our trade with them. How will we be able to trade with them if not only we are more expensive to trade with, but on top of everything else, they don't have the ability to buy our goods and services at the same rate.
Well, and Toronto Stock Exchange is weaker today because of this, I understand.
Of course, and we continue to see oil prices come down because if the U.S. economy is faltering, then the demand on oil is going to go down. But we see people going to that safe haven currency, safe haven commodity rather, which is gold. So we see gold prices again at a record high, trading above $16.26 an ounce this morning. And that really does show that people are very concerned about where they want to put their money. And a lot of investors, when they don't know where to put it, they put it into gold. And that's why we're seeing that price go up. Economists are saying we could see $2,000 an ounce by the end of the year on gold prices if the world economies, this is not just the U.S., but also the debt crisis in Europe, continue to plague the markets and continue to send all these negative and insecurities to the markets.
Rubina Ahmed-Haq is a freelance business correspondent. She's with alwayssavemoney.ca and with us here on News Talk 1010. Well, the Republicans, Boehner is just absolutely not willing to talk about raising the debt ceiling, and I can look at that and say, well, good on them, because I hate it when governments come to the idea of we've got to raise taxes, we've got to spend more money, as opposed to learning to cut. So the whole debate here in Toronto, as we talked about, but it's not like the Republicans haven't raised the debt ceiling.
Well, George Bush raised the debt ceiling 8 times when he was in office.
So once a year, basically.
Basically, and the debt ceiling, which this whole idea of the debt ceiling came into play in 1917. And the reason the U.S. has a debt ceiling is because the U.S. currency is considered a world currency. As you know, you can go anywhere in the world and you can trade U.S. dollars. So there had to be some control put on it. Otherwise, they could print billions and trillions of dollars and dilute their currency and make other currencies more expensive, and in fact, make it harder for people to do business in other countries. So there had to be some sort of debt ceiling put on the U.S. to begin with. But it's the job of the party that is not in power to oppose the debt ceiling being raised, because they are there to make sure that they're doing the checks and balances, and they're making sure that Americans are not taking on more debt than they need to going forward. But 8 times George Bush did it, and we did it. This one raise would not be unusual for something that's been happening in the U.S. for about 100 years.
Well, other countries don't do it. You've just said why the United States does it. Mm-hmm. We don't have it. Would it be good if we did?
I don't think that we need it. I don't think that we have a credit problem the way that the U.S. does. I think that we are very good in our spending. We have been, we always held ourselves up after the economic crisis. We were the only country that really didn't take any bailouts. We had to bail out our auto industry, but we didn't take bank bailouts. No company went bankrupt because of what happened during the economic crisis in 2008. So there is no need for the Canadian currency to have some sort of debt ceiling put on it. But if you look at countries that have no debt ceiling, Greece, Ireland, look at the debt problems that they're in. They continue to borrow. They continue to not tax their citizens properly. They continue to fail to even collect taxes, and then they get themselves into this situation. So there is absolutely an argument that perhaps everybody does need a bit of a credit limit. You have a credit limit on your credit card. I have got one on my credit card. Somebody has decided that's how much I can spend in 1 month. It's sort of the same kind of idea. Each country should perhaps have some sort of limit. You can't just go, take and spend $100,000 today on whatever you want and then think about it tomorrow how you're going to pay for it, right?
Yeah. Now, one of the notes that you sent me, and Rubina Ahmed-Haq is with alwayssavemoney.ca, a failure for the U.S. to come to a conclusion on whether to raise the debt ceiling would be a catastrophe for the global economy. Could that not be worded, though, that perhaps a failure to cut spending would be the same thing? I mean, what they have to do is come to a balance of some sort.
Absolutely, because even if they raise the debt ceiling August 2nd, that doesn't mean that their debt worries are over and that everything is hunky-dory. Again, in September, they're going to have to mail out their Social Security checks, pay all their employees that work for the government, and on top of it, pay their creditors. So any bond that's coming due, they need to deal with that money as well. So it's not a one-shot solution where they're going to fix it August 2nd. It's just like how in Greece, where it came to a pass where there came a point where they had to actually go to the IMF and say, we need money, give us the money so we can bail ourselves out and just figure things out for the short while. This is exactly what the U.S. is doing, is saying, let us raise the debt ceiling so that we can get our fiscal house in order and we can pay our creditors and we can mail out our Social Security checks. And next month, hopefully, we'll be in a better situation. Well,
I think the one thing we learned from talking to you about this, Rubina, is you can't look at it and say, well, that's the United States. Let them worry about it. Who cares? We have to care.
If the U.S. sneezes, Canada gets a cold. And that is something that we need to always keep in our mind. They are a 300 million strong country, and they are the biggest economy in the world, and they're in our backyard, if you want to call it that. Or we're in their backyard, I think more is what it's like. Yeah. And every time anything happens in the U.S., whether they go to war to another country or their economy is suffering, Canada is affected. We are so closely tied to them. And for us to do trade with Europe, I know there's a lot of talk that we've continued to now trade with Europe. Europe has their own problems, and for us to ship our goods and services over to Europe is so much more expensive. We have an entire ocean between us. The U.S. needs to get stronger in order for Canada to continue to enjoy this economic sort of strength that we've been enjoying for the last how many years.
Freelance business correspondent Rubina Ahmed-Haq, alwayssavemoney.ca. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good to talk to you.